You know, Kevin, every time I think this problem is over, it seems to come back like an irritating rash. How are you tonight, Kevin?
Hey, Jason, I'm doing great. Good to see you. Yeah, every time we think that we're done with this, it comes up again. Yeah.
We've assembled a panel again tonight, and we're talking, of course, about this story about the hammer. We're lucky to have with us the original investigator, Mike Zullo, and the woman who did the very early reporting on this, Sharon Rondeau, joining us again. Sharon, Mike, how are you guys?
Welcome.
How
Doing
are you
great, thank you.
guys?
Lovely to
How
have
are
you
you guys
both.
doing?
We're very well. You know, again, this is something that I thought we had put to bed. I thought we were done with it. But what happened was there was a tweet that went out from Mary Fanning that had caught the attention of the defense attorney who is preparing the defense for General Michael Flynn. And I think that we all hold General Flynn in very high regard. He, of course, was the first casualty in this war against President Trump. And we want to make sure that no outside interference stops this very effective defense that Sidney Powell has been mounting on the general's behalf. So when we saw this tweet, it was a cause for great concern because there are specific details in the story that Mary Fanning has been sharing and that Dave Janda has been proliferating that don't seem to match the original facts. Now, Sharon, on your website, the Post and Email, you've done quite a bit of reporting about this. Do you want to catch us up to speed just a little bit and tell us what's going on as far as you understand it?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Jason. And good to be with you again, of course, and everyone. Um, I became very interested in the Dennis Montgomery matter because Mike Zullo had to testify in the federal court case back about 4 years ago. In fact, it was in November of 2019. And to me, it was a fascinating story and one that did need to be told because it was interwoven with the birth certificate investigation that Mike worked on for more than 5 years, that many know about and most of the mainstream has not covered. At any rate, what's interesting is that Dennis Montgomery approached the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, and I know Mike is going to talk about that later. And he was actually supervised by Mike and a detective for almost 2 years total, and he never actually produced the crucial data that he said he had on government surveillance, and particularly he did produce some data that Mike Zullo said was verifiable and that was verified, but the bulk of what he said he had never came to be. And I thought that too that this story was over, but recently there have been many reports of Montgomery being a whistleblower again. I mean, we thought he was a whistleblower back in 2013 when he approached the MCSO, Sheriff Arpaio, and there's video of him interviewing with Sheriff Arpaio and with Detective Makowitz, and so he was given certainly lots of opportunity to gather the data and produce it. Well, he never did that, according to Mike's reporting, and Mike was an eyewitness. You can't get any closer than that. So now there are these recent reports that he claims this and he claims that, and the questions I have are, why is it different now? What's changed since 2013? What different information does he have? And in full disclosure, Dennis Montgomery contacted me beginning around this time of last year, right through mid-June. He sent me, about 4 dozen emails, something like that, unsolicited. I never contacted him. I never knew where to reach him, nor ever tried. And he was trying to interest me in doing a story about him. And he did say, as I have told you on a previous occasion, that he wanted positive coverage. I can understand everyone wanting coverage that's positive, but really news coverage should be neither good nor bad. It should be balanced and present all sides as much as possible. At any rate, I did listen to the broadcast that Dr. Dave Janda did with Kirk Wiebe and Bill Binney on October 24th. And what puzzles me there is that Kirk Wiebe, and I don't know him personally, I have exchanged emails with him on the record, so nothing was done in ambush or surprise. But what he said to me most recently on September 30th in an email chain, something I didn't get to publish just because I didn't get to put out another story on it, was that he and Bill Binney, thought that perhaps Montgomery has some information that the federal government should investigate. Now, that's not unlike what Mike Zullo and others have said. Whatever he says he has, produce it and it should be investigated. But on the Janda show on October 24th, there was a much more strident tone, a very almost an apocalyptic kind of a tone that we're going into a constitutional crisis. It had to hinge, I think, on the 2020 elections coming up, election integrity, which I think every good American should be concerned about. But all of a sudden he said that, we've got to all call our congressmen in the White House. And I'm not sure how it's any more urgent now than it was before, except that Mr. Wiebe said that he talked with Dennis Montgomery apparently on the evening of October 23rd. And now suddenly what Mr. Wiebe is saying is that he would stake his very reputation after decades in government service and as an NSA director, and very well trusted from what I understand. He would stake his entire reputation on what Dennis Montgomery reportedly claimed in a single phone call. But that's not consistent with what Mike Zullo remembers. He said that he and Mr. Wiebe and Dennis Montgomery shared a 45-minute phone call. Mike can tell you the exact year. And that afterward, he and Kirk talked for another 15 minutes. But Mr. Wiebe said that October 23rd was the first time he ever spoke with Dennis. Now, I'm not sure how other reporters work, but I need to speak with someone more than once. And I certainly need to see hard documentation, not necessarily through the U.S. Postal Service, but I need to see something that I can then take and call the government, whatever agency it is, and verify to the degree that I can. And I'm just not sure where this is coming from. I'm not saying that all these people are not great Americans, but I'm just wondering why suddenly does Dennis Montgomery have all of this credibility when he went to the MCSO and didn't produce the material, when in 2015 he was given 2 sittings in a SCIF, as has been reported, which is a special compartmentalized intelligence or information facility. It's soundproof and completely secure. Supposedly, he spent 2 sessions with FBI there, and they never took any action. And then in 2016, attorney Larry Klayman filed a lawsuit against New York Times writer. He's now a former New York Times writer, but author James Risen. And that case was dismissed because Mr. Montgomery failed to produce information, the data, the software that was at issue. And not only did he not produce it, but upon court order, he did not produce it. And then he said he searched his memory, basically said, well, I guess I never really had it. And that's on file. There is a judge's opinion from Judge Rudolph Contreras in 2017. That ruling came down. And I'm sorry, 2016. It was filed in 2015. So I'm just confused as to why all of a sudden, yes, and there is actually an outstanding criminal case in the state of Nevada. All defendants are innocent until presumed guilty in the United States of America. That's what our Fifth Amendment guarantees us. But there is a case that's outstanding, and I contacted the DA yesterday through email, and what he said is that it is still open. I can give you the exact response. It is, quote, the last date in the system is for July 2019 for a status check on negotiations. There is nothing showing beyond that date, unquote. That is what the DA's office told me. So that is still open. And if you read the docket as you're scrolling through now, there are indications that there were supposed to be a couple of jury trials. They were canceled. I don't know why. And then there were plea negotiations in effect or somehow in progress. I don't know what the outstanding the delay is, but it has not come to a final trial or a plea agreement. So that's where we stand now. But I don't understand why all of a sudden there is all this credibility given to Mr. Montgomery when he's had many, many opportunities to produce the data that he said he had.
Right. And the thing we want to reiterate, Sharon, thank you very much for that detailed explanation. We're not doing this because we have some kind of issue with Dennis Montgomery. This all came about after Kevin appeared on Dave Janda's program, and just some information was discussed that Kevin found somewhat incongruous, began to look at it, and it's just gotten, more and more resistance coming back at us as we talk about this. And then we just want to make sure that someone who has a what would we call this, Sharon? This is not a rap sheet, but this is a record of criminal trials that are going on. We just don't think that there is a legitimate set of evidence that allows Dennis Montgomery to be called a real whistleblower and for him to become associated with General Flynn. I personally see that as a danger to the general's defense and offering nothing to help him. Kevin, what do you think about this?
Well, yeah, Jason, I think that's very true. That's how serious this is. And we've all wanted this to go away, but it keeps coming back after we've disproven it on two videos that we put out there before with our panel. And yet, I think the most concerning thing this has been passed to General Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell, as if it's true and factual, when it's not. We've proven that the majority of the information is erroneous. Let's just put it this way. We proved that Dennis Montgomery is a known and documented fraud and con man. That's out on several documents. And here it goes to General Flynn's attorney. It could have affected his entire case if they bit on this and took it forward. Now, I have been in contact with some people, and I know that Sidney Powell has not bit on this, thank God. Had she done so, because Mary Fanning's article is complex and a well laid out error, in my opinion, it was easy to buy. So I think finally they caught it, and they're not going to bring it in as part of Flynn's defense. Thank God. It could have ruined his trial, put him back in jeopardy of criminal prosecution. This is no small matter.
Certainly not. And that's why we wanted to assemble this panel today so that we could talk about it. Kevin, you've put together a PowerPoint presentation that details some of the evidence that we've been talking about over the past, it's months now that we've been discussing this.
Yeah.
So do you want to go through that, or when do we want to get to that?
Well, yeah, Jason, let's go ahead and do that now, and then we can just go on to discussion after that. But yeah, let's bring that up. And the reason I'm doing this, I want people to see this documented on the screen. And of course, after this broadcast, they can go back and look at this evidence again. So these are the evidentiary documents that I uncovered and then as we progressed even more. The 47 hard drives are proven false. They were fabricated. That's documented. The 600 million pages of surveillance information on American citizens was false. It was never produced. It was erroneous. And Mike will know this better than I, but the Melendres case makes it clear, and here it is on the screen, that the experts, Mike Zullo, Makowitz, and others, and two NSA advisors they brought in, ruled that the information on these drives was worthless, fabricated, and essentially that Montgomery was a fraud. So that's why I'm putting this up there, just so people can see this. And Mike, I'm sure will address this later on.
Absolutely. And we've also got kind of a lot of evidence. These 47 hard drives, initially thought to be 50. Mike has told us that they contained essentially gibberish, and when pressed for the real software, the real source code, the real information, there's never really been a very satisfactory answer. Kevin, can you speak to some of the initial testimony from the NSA expert witnesses?
Yeah, this is what shocked me more than anything in the beginning, is that this is a document where Kirk Wiebe, along with Thomas Drake, state after they had been hired by the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office to look at Montgomery's things. This was their final conclusion, and let me read it. This is from Thomas Drake to Brian Makowitz. Brian, good morning. Kirk Wiebe and I are providing you a summary attached of our data and information analysis of the alleged quote-unquote key data designed to prove the source's case. We have found that he is a complete and total fraud. All he has done is provide you with readily available lists and email addresses, names, phone numbers of both individuals and businesses, and a lot of framed up information, data and code, but no proof of whence they came, and a whole lot of faked and made up documents and analysis. Tom. Now, this was the official statement based on a court case that were given by Mr. Wiebe specifically in this case, documenting that Montgomery was a fraud and his information was erroneous.
And it's important to reiterate that it's not some decision, Kevin, that you and I have come to. We're not saying Dennis Montgomery is a fraud. We're simply pointing out that this document, which is email from Thomas Drake to Brian Makowitz, while Brian Makowitz was at the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office working with Mike Zullo on this case, this is what Makowitz had to say about it. So that's quite interesting. Let's talk also, Kevin, this piece of evidence has been somewhat problematic. Do we want to discuss this?
Yeah, one of the first things I picked out, and you all also, if you look, this is the so-called property report that Mary Fanning puts in almost all of her articles as evidence that Dennis Montgomery turned these so-called 47 drives over to the FBI. Now, I have a counterintelligence background, so I look at the details, and I mean, this popped out. This is easy. If you look, neither one of these documents has a file number on it. That is, Mike and I having been formerly in law enforcement, federal and state, it is required by law to have a file number on each one of these. And notice that the handwriting on each one of these documents, one handwriting is different from the other. And most importantly, at least in my view, and the first thing that I recognize is they're not signed by the FBI property recipient. And I can tell you, and I'm sure Mike can tell you too, that that is required by law. For anything that goes in or out of these property rooms is required by law for proper chain of custody, and it is so strongly enforced because it can make or break a court case if that chain of custody is broken. So the fact that these have no signature on them, they're fake.
Yeah, well, right. It's suggestive that something unusual has happened with them, but the most important thing that you've just said, Kevin, and Mike, weigh in if you would, without the file number, without the intake agent's signature, utilizing these documents as any form of valid evidence basically goes out the window. Isn't that right, Mike?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And to add to that, if this were information being turned over to me in this fashion, not only would it be logged in as it is on these unsigned documents, but each drive, I would then most likely either etch in my badge number or serial number and another distinctive character, labeling it badge number +1, +2, +3, to show continuity and to preserve that piece of evidence as being the actual piece of evidence I've taken into custody. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what has gone on with these documents. I agree with Kevin. These have to be signed. There has to be a case number or file number. I have no idea what he turned over, but based on a later court filing that Sharon alluded to, Montgomery bringing forth his own litigation against the New York Times for tens to hundreds of millions of dollars he was seeking in damages. He turned over information prior to that to the FBI, which is reflected here, and there doesn't seem to be any concern as far as the FBI was concerned, or the DOD, or the CIA, regarding Montgomery testifying to anything he turned over. There was no recertification of a state secrets privilege. There was no protective order. Even the judge, I believe Contreras was his name, made note of that the government did not intercede. On another point in that, Montgomery alleged that the FBI, again, has his software or has his information, and maybe the FBI damaged it. He puts forth that the software in question that would validate his claims, he turned over to the FBI as represented on those logs. Going back and forth, motion after motion, like Sharon pointed out, he now claims, I never had it. So there's a problem there with that whole scenario.
Absolutely.
Here's a guy who's claiming the FBI has done something or they're in possession of it. They're saying they can't find it. He's asserting they're looking for it. They're coming back to the judge saying, we can't locate it and he can't tell us where it is on there, so we're not going to look for it. But what he didn't count on, and my memory is, if it's serving me correctly, I believe it was either the Air Force or the CIA. What he didn't realize, they scoured those hard drives. They could not find the software in question. But again, they were not concerned about anything that was on those drives. That speaks volumes.
Yeah, and we should
Because
reiterate,
there was proof.
there's some sort of special relationship between the CIA and the Air Force with regard to information technology. May I ask you one more question about this evidence receipt, Mike? In
Sure.
your history in law enforcement, have you ever interacted with a suspect or anyone who is providing any evidence who, for whatever reason, injury or some kind of incapacitation, was unable to sign in such a way that you had to sign for them? Has that ever occurred, or are you aware of any special procedure that a law enforcement officer receiving evidence is intended to utilize when the provider of that evidence is not able to sign for it?
I have not personally had that situation, although had that occurred, there are two things we could have done, we could have accomplished, especially under today's, ability to make allowances for certain things. A simple X with a mark with 2 or 3 different law enforcement officers signing next to it, witnessing his signature, or nothing as simple as an ink pad and a thumbprint, put it here. There's so many different ways you could have accomplished this if indeed you wanted to. I am not so sure that these weren't signed. I don't believe that these are actual. There's things that Kevin has pointed out here that are extremely suspect, especially that little dash where there's no file number. Right. I don't understand it. But that being said, let's say for some reason the FBI screwed up. The point of the matter is he turned over information that nobody cares about.
Right.
That's the point.
Right.
And in Montgomery, he likes to hide behind this state secret privilege, which was instituted against him in his civil trial back in 2006 between him and Intrepid. And all the research that was done, and again, even Judge Contreras says that the state secret's privilege can only be initiated by the government and can only be enforced by the government, and no private person can institute that. However, it's on a case-by-case basis. Right. In other words, if he's in a trial in 2006 and then another one happens in 2008, the government has to come back in and recertify that all over again.
Right.
It doesn't live on in perpetuity through different trials. Now, there's an argument out there, well, whatever he said would still be covered under that, state secret privilege. Well, here's where the issue is with that. If Dennis Montgomery wants to claim everything I can't talk about is under state secret privilege, then why is he discussing the hammer? Why is he discussing sources right. and methods? And why is he doing it with Kurt Wiebe and Bill Benny, who no longer have security clearance? Their security clearance was suspended indefinitely when they left the agency. Why is he discussing this in public? And why hasn't he not been arrested for even divulging the name of an operation called the Hammer?
Yeah, and I want to remind people on our panel here, we've got Mike Zullo, who not only has decades of experience in civilian law enforcement, as you were a Newark, New Jersey police detective for a long time, weren't you, Mike?
Demarest, New Jersey. I was an investigator in the state of New Jersey, and then I did 12 years volunteering my services to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office under Joseph Arpaio, originally heading up a cold case unit for him to investigate cold cases, which spun off into the birth certificate, which spun off into this whole CIA mess.
And Mike's been exploring the possibility of taking up the hobby of orthopedic surgery, but he's probably not going to venture into that. Kevin, of course, has decades of experience with all this type of classified stuff and court cases related to classified programs and information and intelligence, clearance levels and all that sort of thing. Everybody knows Kevin had a really difficult legal battle with the CIA. So we're not just a bunch of people who were looking at this. I mean, I am, but Kevin and Mike are uniquely qualified to address these concerns. And Kevin, I know you have a few more bits of evidence that you want to take us through, so why don't we carry on with that, and then we'll hand it over to Mike for some more of that analysis.
Sure, Jason. Thank you. What we have next is a email from Fox News' Carl Cameron to quote-unquote David Webb, and that is Dennis Montgomery's email alias. And it's the same thing that Mike has alluded to, Montgomery promising all these classified super secret drives. But here's what Cameron wrote. Fox never froze your story, Dennis. You did. The day we met, I told you any story hinged on the data. On tape, you described the data and you said you would produce it and you would be able to face the music, having kept the drives. I reiterated repeatedly that day that it was up to you to produce the data, and you repeatedly said you understood. By December, it was clear you were not producing and not being honest. I reiterated the need for the data, and you repromised. In January, you admitted you never intended to produce what you promised because of the potential criminal charges. Face it, you have been lying about a lot of things. I was not surprised when Blixeth called me from Arizona and put Arpaio on the phone with me in January, and deputies began calling soon after. I was not surprised when other reporters were contacted about you. I'm not surprised that your story is coming out and that you are not part of it. I'm surprised that you think Arizona can help you. I'm surprised you keep deluding yourself and trying to blame me for your own unwillingness to keep your word. I'm surprised that a guy as smart as you who insists, quote, data trumps rhetoric, unquote, would keep insulting my intelligence with empty rhetoric instead of the data you promised. And then Carl Cameron eventually dropped the story completely.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, this isn't, conclusions that we've come to. We're looking at evidence that's been supplied by other people. And in this case, you've even got an email, I believe, that was sent to you. Isn't that right, Kevin?
Yeah, and I reluctantly put this one up because I don't want to cast aspersion personally on Kirk, but based on everything that they've said on Janda's program, especially, they're claiming that Montgomery does have some information, essentially that he is credible, and therefore they're backing that. But here's an email. I asked about this, and this is what Weeby's email says. Kevin, there is no way for us to know whether Dennis ran the Hammer or any program, as we have not seen direct evidence. That said, and the key fact that makes us believe he deserves a listen, is Negroponte's sponsored court-ordered gagging him based on national security concerns. Now, that's in black and white. And let me address, if I may, real quickly, Jason, the state secrets privilege claim.
Please.
That is what Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe have been stating over and over. That's why Montgomery is legitimate. That's why he needs to be listened to, because they invoke the state secrets privilege. Being somewhat of a expert on that, and I cover it in detail in my book, From the Company of Shadows, if you read the court documents closely, the state or the privilege claim pertains to E-Trepid's intellectual property, even mentions that. And E-Trepid classified contracts and documents. Montgomery was not an internal CIA employee. He was an employee of E-Trepid, and E-Trepid had the facility clearance granted by the CIA. This is what the court case actually says. Quote, the government argued that the information contained therein related to proprietary intellectual property, that's E-Trepid's source code, and national security classified documents. That's the E-Trepid contract with the CIA. This has nothing to do with Dennis Montgomery's information, and Dennis Montgomery was not a CIA employee, CIA officer, or anything else. He worked for E-Trepid on a CIA contract. And it's really important for us all to remember that.
Absolutely. Now, there was also some sort of a question that you had raised, Kevin. There was some kind of, what was it, his clearance or some kind of document that he had, the date didn't match. And this is the type of document that you have firsthand experience dealing with in the CIA. What was that detail?
Yeah, that is the CIA secrecy agreement. And I was a senior officer who briefed everyone, every new employee and detailees of all ranks. I briefed them as they came into the CIA with a classified briefing. Once that briefing was done, I was the person who executed these secrecy agreements, to use the term loosely. I was the one that witnessed these secrecy agreements for these people. So I would brief them, they would come by, I'd sit at a desk, and I'd witness the fact that every single one of them had seen them and sign off on their CIA secrecy agreement, which I briefed them on in detail. I got my hands on Dennis Montgomery's so-called secrecy agreement And going back to that link that you had there, Jason, anybody can go out and look at this link and see Dennis Montgomery's secrecy agreement. And at the very, very end, having done these, there is a label pointer put there by the CIA, security debriefing, sign here. And it's not signed. So, and this document, by the way, was given to me by Dennis Montgomery. So he gave this to me trying to purport that he had a current CI security clearance, not knowing the fact that I used to do that in the CI. And I know that process inside out and what it looks like from this document, and that indeed he's lost his clearance and he was debriefed, and somehow he was able to copy this document, probably at a break or something, but it wasn't signed by the security officer yet.
And I apologize, Kevin. The link is, what we'll do is maybe we can post that PDF document on Patreon afterwards, because this is linking to a local drive. So sorry about that.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is stuff that we've spoken about before. We've spoken about his propensity for civil litigation against anybody who upsets him in any way. Sharon was telling us about the large number of criminal hearings and various issues that have come up in Nevada and elsewhere. Do we want to say anything about this? Or we covered it, I think, right?
Well, go ahead.
If I could, I think we covered that thing. Look, that's pending. He was indicted on those felonies, but it hasn't been adjudicated yet.
Right.
So right now the presumption of innocence goes to him.
Yes.
Let's go. Okay.
I would leave that where it sits until that gets adjudicated. However, he was indicted. I mean, that's a big deal. Let's not kid ourselves. Let me just go back to one thing that you touched on. Carl Cameron in Fox News. I could speak directly to that. Detective Makowitz and I had dinner with Carl Cameron in Washington, D.C., discussing the Montgomery situation. They had actually sent out a film crew before we made our first contact with Dennis Montgomery, because he was trying to get his story out that way. What Carl Cameron was asking for, Montgomery made representations, like he made to us, that the government surreptitiously took private information, including bank account numbers and credit card information, along with social security numbers and employment history of multitudes of people. What Carl Cameron was after, he wanted a number of names with that information, including the credit card numbers, so they could contact those individuals and verify the information. That's all he was asking for before he ran the story. Much like the sheriff's office was trying to validate information that would not be classified, but prove the breach. Mm-hmm. And how this unfolds is Montgomery wants to claim the breach occurred under the auspice of the federal government illegally spying on people. Well, that's a very elaborate cover if you're nothing more than a computer hacker, because you can blame everything on the federal government.
Right. And the other thing I want to, sorry, Mike, I don't mean to interrupt. The other thing I wanted to reiterate is that none of us are denying that illegal spying is going on. None of us are denying that these government programs exist. Oh no. Did we just lose Kevin? I think I just disconnected Kevin. I'm sorry. Let me add him back here real quick. Okay. So the point is, we're just saying that there's serious and important details about this story that are being manipulated, omitted, or otherwise not properly represented. And that's not to say that we don't think that General Flynn or President Trump have been spied on. I just wanted to be very clear about that, Mike.
Well, that's true. And you go back into his litigation history, and you're going to see him laying out the same accusation, where he claims that, I believe it was Tim Blixseth and the DOJ, the federal government, were hacking into Idra Blixseth's attorney's emails or something to that effect. I mean, it's always in conjunction with the government. And this is something that is really telling now, and you have to realize, when we were in contact with Montgomery, which was towards November of 2013, a lot of his court interactions in that point in time were happening in real time. Mm-hmm. We didn't have access to this trove of information about him in hindsight that we have now. We were living some of this.
Right.
We didn't know about a lot of the litigation that was going on. So in saying that, in court documents, The very first time Montgomery makes any claim that he was instrumental in any kind of illegal spying is when Snowden released documentation back in, I believe, May of 2013. The same time Montgomery contacts Risen from the New York Times and tells him that he was part of this. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go into 2013, you kind of work this like a cold case. What was going on then? Well, you come across Kurt Wiebe doing televised interviews. Frontline is one that comes to mind, where he's describing the whole Thin Thread caper. Thin Thread and Trailblazer and what they were able to do. Montgomery, in my opinion, gleans this type of information and morphs it into his own story. I've watched this happen. For the longest time, Montgomery had us believing that he was the sole creator of the harvesting platform and the breaching platform, quote, known as the Hammer. But eventually I caught on to it that he was not the creator of the harvesting platform. That was actually Wiebe, Drake, and Binney, and not Montgomery. And when I called him out on that, then he was just the guy who developed, quote, Medusa that would do this breaching. And he showed me a document that showed a patent application for Medusa, but a patent was never issued. So here's where I kind of am now looking at all of this, that Montgomery makes claims that there could be no one to refute his claims because they would either be under some type of state secret privilege or NDA or whatever they're doing, and there's no eyewitnesses. So this whole idea of the Hammer, if the Hammer is what he says it is, and it is a super secret program, he shouldn't be talking about it.
Exactly.
I am starting to believe what the Hammer was nothing more than a high-powered computer system sitting someplace in Fort Washington. He's trying to say that everything he was doing was all this data collection, but all his litigation problems have to do with software that has not proven to be reliable or useful. He's never talking about anything else. He never even points, even just tapping on the door of some other operation. So I'm beginning to wonder how real any of this actually is. He can supply no evidence that the Hammer was used in anything. He can't supply any eyewitness accounts of him working on a super secret program in another part of a building. No one has ever said he would disappear for hours upon hours.
Now,
no
Mike,
one
sorry,
makes that.
Let me interject for a moment because you've just said something really important. He's never provided any evidence that the Hammer was used for anything. Now, this was the main thing that I was trying to present to Dr. Janda when I called him the other day. I really wanted to speak to Dave Janda. I wanted to invite him on this show and basically ask him, what evidence do they have that this was the spying system used against Donald Trump or General Flynn? Because we've spoken to other DoD defense, contractors and military IT experts, including Patrick Berge, who's told us about other systems that could have just as easily been used. I'm curious to know what evidence Mr. Janda and Mary Fanning and anybody would have. As you say, there's been no evidence presented to show that this was the system that was used. There's just a few more bits of evidence that's assembled here, Mike, that I think Kevin might want to run through, and then we'll come back because I know you have a ton to say. Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. We only got a couple. And I'm glad you're leaving these up on the screen so people can read these and they can come back later, of course, and read them again for themselves. And that's why I did this. But there's a 2010 Playboy investigation that was done, and it's a big explosive article called "The Man Who Conned the Pentagon." And it goes into, he said he won millions in federal contracts, which he did, I think about 20 million. And later they determined that the software was a hoax, and he scammed the Pentagon and he scammed the CIA. His own attorney called him a con artist and a habitual liar. So this article's out there for anybody to see. And if you go to the next one, Jason, we'll look at the next article. I'm showing some of the press coverage. This is Guardian. This is the Nevada gambler, Al-Qaeda, and the CIA, the mother of all cons. And I won't read it, but it discusses the same thing, how Montgomery presented fake source code that the CIA initially bought on because they thought, well, I know the CIA, everybody's trying to jump on everything and be the first to do it, but they jumped on it too quickly and found out that it was completely false. And it caused a big mess in the CIA and a big mess with the Bush administration when they all found out that this was a fake, and it was pretty bad. Anyway, The Guardian talks about it in this article, and people can go out and read it. I have the link there. They can link there and read the whole thing.
And conning the CIA sounds like a great way to get your ass handed to you.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting that he didn't? Isn't it interesting he didn't get it handed to him? And like Mike said, it's because the CIA poured through every single bit, byte, and below on these drives, and they found nothing. So they're like, "Go away, you schmuck!" And we don't know if the CIA went back after Dennis Montgomery for that $20 million. That would have been a classified court case. We just don't know. But we do know they dropped him like a rock. The documents that we talked about earlier indicate he lost his clearance. And remember, that was all under E-Trepid. He was not an internal employee. The point I'm making with this slide is that we've been going on and on and on for months about this, and we've invited Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe on to talk about it, and that's been refused. We'd invited Dave Janda. You tried to contact Dave Janda. That's been refused. We've tried our level best from the very beginning to try to get this thing out with all points of view. But our evidence, of course, as you all know, it's all out there for everybody to see. Our evidence has been completely ignored by these people. And we're talking some of the things we've all just talked about, court documents, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office investigation and those documents, credible investigative journalists like James Risen and Sharon Rondeau, who's with us today, a criminal investigation, and of course, all the stuff we all put out there. They have completely ignored that. And we proved that the 47 drives were fake and the 600 million pages of surveillance information on Americans was fake, just for starters. So, there are questions hanging out there. Why have they overlooked this information? Why have they blocked attempts from talking to us? And why haven't they looked at this information and published a retraction? Professional journalists, we all do it. When we make a mistake, we come out and say, well, we made a mistake here, and here's a correction to that. That's what you do. Everybody does it. But they continue to push this story despite our evidence.
Yeah, and not only that, Kevin, I want to point out to the people who are watching right now that as these questions have been raised about any of the reporting that you and I have done about this, and we've worked with Sharon and Mike throughout that process, we are not resorting to calling them names. And, they've said many, many times that you getting involved in this is just simply an indicator that you are still, shilling for the CIA or whatever it is that they say. I've heard them say, once CIA, always CIA or something like this. But I don't understand how they think that would not apply to their NSA experts who they are relying on. It's a really empty. They've relied on ad hominem attacks against me. We aren't doing that. Yeah. We keep coming back to the evidence, and I think that's very important.
Right. Well, you raise a good point there, Jason, because what they've done is kind of, instead of coming out with the facts and discussing them, instead that they've attacked. And of course, I'm out there and I'm the primary target, I guess, but they've made so many ridiculous claims. Some of them are almost funny. I don't think there's any such thing as a parallel platform. Well, what's that got to do with our documentation? Although I do talk about parallel platforms in the NSA FBI database that the FBI gave to private contractors. So that's not true. They said that none of us are experts on any of this. How wrong could they be? Mike's a criminal investigator. I'm a counterintelligence investigator. I was in charge of international information security for the CIA. Yeah, we do. We are experts on this. These are ad hominem attacks, like you said. Oh, and the big one, Kevin Shipp is covering for the deep state. That came from Dave Janda. I was so upset by that I called Janda personally and demanded that he apologize and go to my website. After what I suffered and the things that I went through, for them to say that really got my dander up. And Janda knows my background. Just another ad hominem attack. And then once CIA, always CIA, and I love what you said, Jason. Well, then once NSA, always NSA.
Right.
And lastly, well, Kevin Shipp put a video up and then he took it down, so we must be right. Well, no. I put out my initial investigation results on this, just starting from scratch on YouTube, and then thank God Mike called me and said, yeah, Kevin, a lot of what you're saying is right, but some of it is not. And we went through, goodness, an hour or two together of information, and I took notes. So I came back, republished the video with all of Mike's updated information, correcting everything that was not in there. So that's the procedure there. I didn't take the video down because I was trying to hide anything. I took the video down and put up a new one to be accurate. So again, these are ad hominem attacks. They never, ever once have addressed the facts that we have put out there.
Right. Very well said, Kevin. So, and as we know, Dennis Montgomery has a long history of litigation, both as a plaintiff and a defendant in civil matters. And as Sharon has provided us with the records of the docket, lots of other legal problems. He's obviously presumed innocent until proven guilty. But, Kevin, you and Mike and Sharon have each cited elements of evidence, sometimes coming from his own representation. So we're just quoting what other people have said and looking at that in the entire body of evidence. Kevin, was there anything else you wanted to cover? Because I know Mike has a lot to add.
Well, let's go with Mike, and then I'll come in after Mike. That's great.
Sure.
All right, Jason, there's a couple other things. Mary Fanning, who I personally do not regard as a journalist or an investigative reporter, because obviously Mary Fanning and I were in contact when these whistleblower tapes came out. I was actually one of her original sources. She fails to leave that out of the equation. She spoke to me, I believe, back in 2017. And I was giving her some background into what I knew. She leaves that completely out. On top of that, here's the defense for Montgomery that's been circulating out there. First, in an attempt just to smear my credibility, Mary Fanning goes out there and claims that I illicitly recorded Dennis Montgomery during our interactions without his knowledge. I'm going to tell you, number one, that's patently false. Dennis Montgomery was advised by Detective Makowitz and myself on our initial meeting with him that we will be sporadically taping you, either audio or visual, because you're telling us about things we have no knowledge of, and we have to make sure we get it correct, because we're not going to understand a lot of the things that you're saying. And he was in full agreement.
Now, Mike, sorry to interrupt again, but rather than just laying that down, can I play a piece of video evidence that you've provided, which I think will leave viewers with no doubt that Dennis Montgomery was, in fact, fully aware that you were recording him?
And this is one of our very first interactions with Dennis as he's laying all this secret CIA stuff. And if I could just set this up for you, you have to realize he came to the sheriff's office with the identities of 151,000 Maricopa County residents that could be used in an identity fraud case. We went there under the identity fraud possibility of our resident and walked into this whole CIA trap, if you will. So what you're going to see is a very small snippet. I'm not releasing the full video yet, but it's a small snippet that I think will clarify this issue.
Right. Okay, let me run that for everybody.
Yeah. So, just curious. So,
Are you recording this? Just make sure you don't get my grandkids' pictures. I don't care about
them. Oh, that's right. So when you
So he's clearly aware. He asks you to turn the camera away so that it won't see his grandchildren's pictures, indicating
Jason,
that
if you would do me a favor and play it one more time,
Sure.
something got in the audio there.
Sure. Yeah. Sharon, could you hit
Got
mute,
scratchy
please?
sound again.
Yeah. So, just curious. So
Are
when
you
you
recording this? Just make sure you don't get my grandkids' pictures. I don't care about them.
that's right. So when you did this.
All right, so Jason, what that is, that's Detective Makowitz. We're in his office in his home. This is where all his computer equipment was that you could actually see something. Everything else, the processing was in the garage. And what you'll see here, we're just sitting down with this guy for the first time. This is not a man that says, hey, wait a minute, are you recording me? Hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? That's not what he's saying. He just saw me as I pick up my cell phone, press the button, and he just says, are you recording me? And I tell him yes. And he says, just don't get my grandkids' artwork in the background.
Right.
Now, that's a guy who is not startled by this because he knew we were going to do this. And this was one of the very first recordings that were made. So his claim that he was illicitly recorded is 100% false.
Yep.
It's another lie that Montgomery puts out there in order to tarnish you and make himself the victim. In addition to that, you've got this new idea proffered by Mary Fanning, and her headline is, Zulo misleads NSA experts, leaving out key facts about Montgomery. Let me explain to you what that is. Thomas Drake and Kurt Wiebe issued a scathing report of the analysis of information provided by Dennis Montgomery to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And around that same time frame, November, December, January, and maybe into February, I don't really recall the exact dates, Montgomery was asked by us to take his classified information, unencrypted information, his software and source code, and download them onto separate drives so we could store them as evidence, because Montgomery kept telling us that he had a brain aneurysm and could die at any moment. So the best thing that we thought to do was to secure his information going forward. He supplies us with 47 hard drives. He's paid $10,000 a month to create these hard drives. He's telling us that the information is so classified that we are not to look at it because we don't have the proper classifications. We take the information, we store them in sealed evidence boxes, and when he was finished, we took that information to the King County Sheriff's Department out there in Washington State, and we put it in their evidence locker for months. It's sitting there for months. As our investigation continues, I become a little suspect of Dennis Montgomery. I actually arranged to have Kurt Wiebe, Thomas Drake, and Bill Benny agree to look at this information on our behalf. In our initial meeting, both Detective Makowitz and I are present. They are trying to claim that I did not reveal to those three NSA experts that Dennis Montgomery had the state secret privilege placed on him in 2006. I can tell you that's not true. That's false. One of the most beneficial factors towards Montgomery's credibility was the fact that the government would do that. You have to remember, by the time we get there, we're $100,000 into Montgomery. We want Montgomery to be real. His biggest issue has been credibility. But I'm thinking there might be something wrong with these drives. I'm not so sure he's giving us the straight story, and I enlisted their help. Now understand this. I've got sealed evidence boxes with evidence turned over to us by Dennis Montgomery, created by his own hand, that he purports to be classified information. That's in sealed boxes, sealed for 6 months. Nobody touched them. What they are trying to get the public to believe is because Bill Benny and Kurt Wiebe want to claim now that they didn't know about this state secret privilege, that somehow not having that information changed their analysis of what the information in those sealed evidence boxes were. Well, that just doesn't compute. And these guys are mathematicians. They can't make this simple distinction that what's in an evidence box is evidence collected. The background story doesn't matter. Dennis Montgomery could have been Barnum and Bailey, and it wouldn't have mattered what I told them about him. The evidence is the evidence that he's provided. The evidence needs to stand on its own merit. Let me just read to you out of Kurt Wiebe's report what actually they found. This will take your breath away. Dennis Montgomery represented to us that he had documentation and source code that Thin Thread, which was the surveillance program that Kurt Wiebe, the data collection program that Kurt Wiebe, Thomas Drake, Bill Benny, and 2 others created, and plus Trailblazer, which was the prostituted form of Thin Thread that did not have any encryption protections. Therefore, people's private information was readily available, and that was done under Michael Hayden. He's claiming that he had that information. Now, before we met with Kurt Wiebe and Thomas Drake and Bill Benny for them to analyze this evidence, Detective Makowitz and I instructed Montgomery to give us a drive that had all of his supporting documentation to prove where he was. Now, you could bet your bottom dollar that the state secret privilege that they're touting from John Negroponte as like the holy grail of something, that he would include it. As a matter of fact, on that same drive were the falsified government emails that they caught him on, where he was pretending he was talking to government officials. That information was there. Whether these guys don't remember it or they're lying, I don't know what it is, but that information was there. Furthermore, this John Negroponte state secret privilege application or motion or whatever they want to call it, it wouldn't matter if it was Daffy Duck's name if he was the head of the DNI at the time. It's whoever is the head of that department. Judge Contreras says this is not like an unusual event. This happens a lot with contractors, that they issue these kind of protective orders. So we always took it as Montgomery, we could say without a doubt he was involved with the agency at some level because of the state secret program. Go to their report. I'm going to read to you what they said. This is horrifying. Among the alleged applications examined were 3 purported C code files. Now, I'm going to think C code files means classified, because under Hillary Clinton's email, remember the letter C?
Well, it might mean that he's using the C programming language to write it. There is something called C++.
Right, and I was going to say that. But it could also mean that it was classified. So I was going to tell you, I don't know what it means, but as I go further, you get a little different idea. Okay. Among the alleged applications examined were 3 purported C code files allegedly associated with the NSA's Thin Thread and Trailblazer programs. Upon analyzing the format and caveats associated with these particular programs and other data allegedly coming from classified sources, and that's allegedly coming from classified sources, Mr. Wiebe and Mr. Drake encountered non-conventional coding formats and classification caveats not resembling typical government practice. In fact, the 3 code files were actually fake and framed to look like real code, but crudely cut and pasted from snippets of existing code made up from standard code. It looks like buffer routines, video device processing code, and ActiveX lookup and browser code. Mm-hmm. Comments were not in proper syntax and followed standard naming conventions, and were clearly simply manufactured to look like real. For example, one of the files had a comment section noted from Trailblazer program from 2009 and 10 timeframe, when Trailblazer was abandoned at the NSA in 2006.
And Mike, you told us previously, sorry to interrupt, but haven't you told us previously that Thomas Drake actually recognized some of the comments or some of the code as being written by himself, not Montgomery?
Yeah, by a minute. Let me just finish this last sentence. Yeah. In summary, the wholly fake files did not consist of actual software code from any of the NSA programs noted. All right, so he's manufacturing something. Now, his excuse is going to be, I didn't want to release classified information. I don't believe that for a minute. I don't believe he ever had it. Now,
because if it was classified and in his possession, that would be a valid reason for him to give to not release it, rather than putting out something fake. That's not how you protect classified information, as far as I'm aware.
Well, here, he's going to try to assert, I was trying to give them hints. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. You could never support anything that you say.
He was trying to give Binney and Montgomery was trying to give hints to Wiebe, Binney, and Drake. Is that what he was saying?
That's what he's trying to allege now. That's the new thing. It's an ever morphing scenario based on current events when you deal with Dennis Montgomery.
And Mike, is that
There will be
remotely
one story-
standard for a witness to signal to experts and try to give them hints rather than coming straight out and saying, look, I can't reveal this portion of the information because it's classified, but here's what I can tell you? Do they ever give hints? That seems unusual to me.
I wouldn't think so. Look, let me tell you something. People do strange things. But here, this goes back to this. All Montgomery ever had to tell the sheriff's office is, hey guys, I have such classified information, you got to get me to the FBI. We wouldn't have gone through this exercise.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have paid him $10,000 a month for this garbage.
Right.
But, however, if you go back into Montgomery's prior legal history, he does the same thing.
That's
Pattern of
right.
practice. Yeah.
Phony codes, phony software, phony this, phony emails. His history proves relevant throughout his entire episode dealing with, quote, the government. He is falsifying documents all over the place.
Yeah.
So Mary Fanning wants the people to believe that I misrepresented information. Number one, I didn't. Number two, it wouldn't have mattered what I told him because the evidence is the evidence. The evidence doesn't change in the box, or your assessment of the evidence doesn't change in the box.
That's right.
Because I don't tell you something. You never go to the medical examiner or your CSI scientists and tell them much. You say, this is the evidence collected. What can you tell me about it?
Right.
You don't go give them a big background. You might tell them, hey, this guy was shot.
But even
Let
if
me know
you
what kind of
did,
bullets
you're
was on him.
saying it doesn't forensically alter the evidence if you say, here's a hair, I think it came from a dog, and then the scientist determines, no, this is from a cat. They're not going to say, well, Mike said it came from a dog, so I better consider that. They just go with the science. Mike, we're close to an hour, and I know that Sharon is on a tight schedule here, so we're going to continue, but I want to give Sharon an opportunity to make any comments before she has to go. Sharon, anything you want to share with us?
Well, thank you, Jason, and then I will sign off. One thing I'd just like to say is that Montgomery does have a history of making false reports about people with whom he's displeased after
yes.
he interacts with them. Mike can tell you about the false IA complaint he made against him with the MCSO. And regarding me, he put in a complaint with the Washington Department of Public Services, which has to do with social services for disabled adults, or what they call vulnerable adults. That's what their statute says. And I was the subject of an investigation. I was shocked to get a certified letter back in August, and I did do a story on it. I didn't know the disposition for a while because the letter never reached me. They didn't send the disposition letter certified the way they sent the first one, but at any rate, they did find it completely unsubstantiated, and that's in writing, and I put that out there. But I was shocked when I learned that I was the subject of an investigation into mental abuse, quote unquote, of a vulnerable adult in Washington state. The social worker is not allowed to tell me who made the complaint, and she did not, but it was absolutely, there was no question as to who put that in, and I was just shocked. And he also accused Jim Gibbons, former governor of Nevada, of taking a bribe from, this is Montgomery's former business partner, Warren Tripp. Montgomery made the accusation publicly, and the FBI went in and did a big investigation. Gibbons was running for governor of Nevada, and he was cleared. But to have this hanging over you at any time in your life, any kind of thing, so that is three false complaints that I know of. And there are other things, of course, alleged in the FBI 302s, but these are very serious accusations, and they do hurt people.
Yeah, and we're not going to go we're not going to go into details, Sharon, but this was a particularly reprehensible attempt at an attack on you, and I think it's important that people consider how this guy just lashes out and takes pot shots at people. But Sharon, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Thank you for your ongoing investigative reporting, and I do want to remind everyone that they can read more of your work at thepostemail.com. That is your publication. It's an independent news site where Sharon publishes her investigative reporting. The Post and Email, people can go to thepostemail.com. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to carry on with Kevin and Michael while you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day. So, Mike, I think you had some more evidence you wanted to go into. Let's do that.
Well, if you go back into Montgomery's history, you'll find in one of the court cases, I believe in 2006 or 8, the presiding judge over that determined that Dennis Montgomery had perjured himself. Now, perjury is a nice way of saying I lied my ass off in court.
Yeah.
And Dennis Montgomery believed that occurred. And what happened in that case is ultimately that case was decided to be a moot case, and it was not pursued. But the judge recognized that the truth wasn't told. Right? That's a big deal. Montgomery, in addition to that, he settles his litigation with E-Trepid to the tune of Montgomery owing E-Trepid $26,500,000 in damages. Now, that's not a guy who won his fight against his former employer. As a matter of fact, it was found in a lot of these court cases that Montgomery just has a problem with the truth, or he will lay out accusations, especially against the FBI, that later are proven to be false. And then admittedly so, he admits that they weren't true. So you have somebody here that has a history of thumbing his nose even at the judicial process and not divulging the truth. So how anyone could think that somebody of the caliber of Michael Flynn's attorney would not look into the background of Dennis Montgomery first and then interject him in one of the biggest national trials in American history, it defies logic. The same way it defies logic that Kurt Wiebe wants to now divorce himself from this scathing analysis of Montgomery's fictitious information by saying, well, you didn't tell me everything about his background. That's ridiculous. That's disingenuous. Yeah. And I used to hold these guys in really high regard. I can't do that any longer because this is just intellectually dishonest. Mm-hmm. But Mary Fanning is very quick to write things like this, looking to smear the investigators, which, by the way, Mary Fanning did everything in her power to take Montgomery's 2-year interaction with the sheriff's office and eradicate it from his history. She tried not to talk about this. And that was something I was not going to allow to happen. Yeah. Montgomery's history in 2008 came full swing again in 2013. And if you think that was the only fraud associated with Montgomery with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, it wasn't. Dennis Montgomery had represented to me, and I have video evidence of this too. Dennis Montgomery represented to me that he could produce software that would pick out the fictitious anomalies in Barack Obama's long-form birth certificate.
Right.
He said he could build that for me. So we commissioned him to do that. Montgomery was paid through donated funds to the tune of $10,000 to create this program. After months of going back and forth trying to get the program out of him, he finally sends it to me. Sends it to me over files of the internet. I download the program, and I download the birth certificate file that he brought with the program. I put it in per his instructions. I turn it on, and that computer software is lighting up like a Christmas tree. But it's finding a lot of things on it that I already knew existed because other people had found them open source. But I was dealing with Dennis Montgomery. And there's email correspondence submitted to court records in a federal court where I tell him, this doesn't have to work on your file, it has to work on mine. And what I did was I took that same program, only this time, instead of downloading into it the file he supplied, I downloaded the actual 2011 downloaded file from the White House website of that long form birth certificate, ran the software, and the software could not detect a thing. Now you look at that and you're like, well, how could this be? Because Montgomery, I believe, manipulated the file he sent with mine. You go back into Montgomery's legal history. He manipulated computer files to try to fraud the federal government on a program called Find It, where he tried to allege he had software that you could fly from a drone and it would pick up objects and people and vehicles from altitude. But the 302s in the investigation conducted by the FBI, 2 employees claimed that Montgomery had instructed them to sit in a remote room while he was doing the demonstration, and upon a signal on their cell phone, to press a button on the computer. They didn't realize what they were doing till later on, and they realized when they pressed the button, it would highlight on the monitor being viewed by government officials to give the impression the software had located an object like a bazooka or a AK-47 or a person. It was a scam. You go deeper into his litigation history and you find out that Montgomery was promised a big payday if that software functioned and the government bought it. So there was the motivation. Now, this isn't anything anybody's making up. This is in court documents. What I can tell you is being firsthand experience with Dennis Montgomery, we've been subject to a fraud by him on 2 levels. Montgomery is not a truthful individual. Montgomery cannot provide any substantial evidence to back his claim. The only thing we know is he had initial evidence he showed the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office that was alarming to us, but we don't know the origin. In other words, he wants to say the government took it. We're not too sure the government did take it. It may well have been Montgomery. We just don't know.
Now, you've presented us with a litany of firsthand evidence, Mike, just a mountain of problematic statements and submissions and all that. So there's been a recent sort of realignment of Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe and Dennis Montgomery. Isn't that right? I'm sorry, was there anything else that you wanted to give us along those lines, Mike? I think that was what you wanted to say, right?
Well, no, and I can tell you that is right. There is a realignment. And I had a conversation with Kirk Wiebe about 2 months ago via telephone over the initial things with Montgomery. And I gave him a really clear warning. I said, Kurt, do yourself a favor. Do not align yourself at the hip with Dennis Montgomery. And I went through the information I told you, plus other information. And my exact words to him, Dennis Montgomery is a soul sucker. He will take your reputation, utilize it to be a parasite on your back to get you to whatever goal he has. And he's not going to care what happens to you. He's going to use you. So here's Dennis Montgomery now trying to interject himself into General Flynn's case. Well, here's the biggest problem with any of the representations being made by Wiebe. Wiebe is saying Dennis Montgomery's equipment and his software, the Hammer, was used to spy on General Flynn. Well, here's the biggest problem with that. It was on your show yesterday, Jason, by your expert.
Yeah.
Montgomery's information, his software, is over a decade old. It would not have the ability to penetrate safety firewalls in today's modern systems. Yeah. It can't do it. It's too old. There is no direct evidence to support Wiebe's claim.
Yep.
But yet they're talking out there like they've seen evidence.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you they haven't.
Yeah. No,
so I don't understand the motive. I don't understand the motive for this realignment.
Right.
But I can tell you right now, dealing from facts and evidence, they have neither.
Right. Right. And the testimony you're talking about yesterday from the expert was an interview with Patrick Berge, who's a former IIA specialist with the U.S. Army and was a contractor to the Department of Defense. And Patrick was just commenting as an outside expert witness, hasn't viewed the evidence directly in the way that you have, Mike. So, you know, it's interesting. We've got another piece of evidence that I guess you'd consider circumstantial, but I want people to remember that that doesn't mean it's unimportant. It's an evidence, it is evidence derived from the circumstances of a situation. Kevin, you had a conversation that I think is very relevant to some of what we're talking about right now, right?
Yeah, Jason, very relevant and very puzzling. And let me say this before I begin getting into that. I hear a lot from viewers and on Twitter the statement, can't you all just get along? You're on the same side. Why do you have to, why all the infighting? Why can't you just drop this? And people have got to understand, we tried to get along in the beginning of this with our interviews, and all those people refused to talk to us. And instead, they went on an attack on me and a social media attack against me. This is so serious. The errors and falsity in this case is so serious that you can't just all get along. And not only did we try, but now it has gone all the way up to General Flynn and his council, and it's very, very serious. So it's far beyond getting along. You know, for years, I considered Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe great whistleblowers and good friends, and we did videos together. So it was really difficult for me to see them doing this, and I could not understand. At first, I avoided getting involved in this at all until I realized that this had to be brought. Someone had to know what the facts were, and I reluctantly got into it, knowing that I would be a target in advance. But I had this question, Jason, and we talked about it before. Why are Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe promoting a story that has been proven patently false? They're very, very smart men, as we know. They're both mathematicians. They come from the NSA. They're brilliant men. How could they buy off on a case that is so obviously false with all of the evidence we've provided, some of which everyone has just seen? Kirk Wiebe has come out and said that he now considers Dennis Montgomery as 100% legitimate. That's almost mind-blowing. And in his email to me, of course, he states that they don't know what DM Dennis Montgomery had on his drives or anything else. They'd never seen it, but it was the state secrets privilege that got them. We've already addressed that. But what is odd now, though, you all, that I think is once again plaguing me as a question is Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe are currently working with Dennis Montgomery. There's a video out there on a system to spot voter fraud, to sell this code, I guess, at the state level now to spot voter fraud. And they're working with Dennis Montgomery as an expert to develop this stuff. And I think, Mike, you gave Montgomery the idea about voter fraud IDs and his source code way back in 2013, 2014. So that idea was already out there. In addition to that, it's just so peculiar to me, and it's really, really concerning. Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, through an intermediary, invited me to Washington, D.C. for a meeting in April of 2018. And being friends with them, of course, and having known them to that date, I flew out there and met with them at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. Bill and Kirk both pitched me on a contract they were working on to provide codes to voting machines to stop voter fraud. There was a big thing. Kirk Wiebe said, we can't do it without you. And he said, you'll never have to worry about money again. Now, in April of 2018, they were working on source code to sell to, at the state level, the states and any companies involved to spot voting fraud. That was in 2018. Now, after all this time, they've come out and said they're working with Dennis Montgomery on that very same program. So my question is this: do they have a financial connection with Dennis Montgomery? Have they had a financial connection with Dennis Montgomery for longer than we know? And why on earth are they covering for a story that has been proven several times as patently false? It just blows my mind. And and people need to understand here that we are showing the facts that were very difficult, I know, for me to bring forward because they involve people that I knew and people that were friends of mine. So this is serious. It's very serious.
You know, one other thing that comes to mind, Kevin, people might recall the last interview that I did with Bill Binney. I had simply called him up on the phone, asked him if he would come on the show. We spoke about some dates, and he just said, well, I could do it right now if you want. We recorded the interview right then, and then I put it out. And he had agreed, just, casually, to participate in the first roundtable that we did with you and Mike and Sharon. But after that interview aired, Bill abruptly withdrew his acceptance of that invitation and said that he could no longer speak about this matter because information had been turned over to the FBI, which I accepted, and I still like Bill. We're not doing any of this because we don't like these guys or we're trying to do damage to them. We're just asking questions about things that appear to be facts and other things that appear to be not facts. So if it's a fact that information has been turned over to the FBI and this can no longer be discussed, I'm confused as to why Bill would go on Dave Janda's show and continue to talk about it. Seems to conflict.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jason. That's one of the concerning points. And as you know, I contacted the FBI also and reported it to them in writing. And I was never told by the FBI not to talk about it. So, we'll just let that kind of stand on its own there. But there's something here that is I think deeper that I want people to understand. And what this is a diversion from the real issue, the real deep state coup.
Right.
That is never seen before in our history. It's a distraction from Attorney General Barr's investigation, Sidney Powell and Judicial Watch's cases against deep state corruption and illegal activity. It's a distraction from that. It's a distraction from the facts of the altered FBI 302s, the false FISA affidavits that were used to spy, as we know, on an American citizen, Carter Page. It's a distraction from the CIA MI6 spy, Stephen Halper, who was planted in the Trump campaign. And that information is out there, of course. I think everyone probably knows about that. It's a distraction from the CIA's Joseph Mifsud, who set up George Papadopoulos at the dinner with Alexander Downer, and the FBI claims began their whole investigation into Donald Trump. It's a diversion from the fact that British GCHQ worked with the NSA to unmask the names of people in the Trump campaign. And it's a diversion from the FBI's NSA database I talked about earlier, where the FBI had access into the NSA 702 database at will, and they turned that information over to private contractors and let them run with it. That's the story. And then it leads up to this. It leads up to the defense of an American hero, General Michael Flynn, and his attorney, Sidney Powell, not just his defense, but also an expose of the deep state, maybe for the first time in our history. And of course, above all else, General Flynn's freedom and the safety and security of his family. It leads all the way up to that. And that's why I say this is so serious. And that's why we're doing this program this evening, is because it is that serious.
Yeah, and we do want to encourage people to visit MikeFlynnDefenseFund.org. I want to be very clear that we support General Flynn. I don't know him personally, yes, but I do believe that he was the first casualty in this war against President Trump. I think he would have made an excellent national security advisor, and I have nothing but the highest regard for Sidney Powell and the incredibly effective defense that she's been mounting.
Yes.
Not only because it's critically important to the future of General Flynn and his family, but I think this country and justice. We cannot have this kind of prosecutorial misconduct stand. And the reason why I became so interested in this, Kevin, is because it just really seems like Mary Fanning and her crew, which includes Dave Janda, are trying to mess with this story in some way. I called you, Dr. Janda, because I wanted to have a discussion with you about the facts of this matter and try to figure out where these shortcomings are. Your refusal to do that causes me to think that you know what the facts are, but are knowingly avoiding discussing them. Gentlemen, we're approaching 90 minutes. Is there anything that either of you wanted to share? Mike, any last words before we wrap up for today?
Yeah, I just want to point this out. Kurt Wiebe, Bill Binney, Thomas Drake, look, I believe what they did in the beginning here was very patriotic. They realized that constitutional rights of Americans was being violated. However, that being said, That story has been out there, and that incident took place almost 20 years ago, 2 decades ago. Dennis Montgomery and his tale of woe is a decade old now, or more. I mean, he started in 2001. We're approaching 2020. So his stuff is anywhere from 10 to 20 years old. Everything you know about illegal spying of the U.S. government, by the U.S. government on unsuspecting Americans, has come to the forefront without the aid of Dennis Montgomery. And Dennis Montgomery, at this point in time, I believe, needs to either put up or shut up. Either you have what you said and take the stand and release it so everybody can see it, or stop spinning the same tale and stop trying to leech onto other people's trials and tribulations to further your own cause. And at this point in time, that cause, whether it's to be known as creditable, whether it's money, whether it's fame and fortune, I don't know what it is. But I can tell you right now, you will never escape your lengthy history. You will never escape your courtroom testimonies. You will never escape your situation with the sheriff's office. You are doing nothing but a disservice to fine people. You are actually damaging people. And I will give Bill Binney, Kurt Wiebe, a big warning. Dennis Montgomery, from firsthand experience, is extremely convincing. Extremely convincing. But once you start to investigate it, it unravels. Don't be duped. Don't take anything on face value, because when push comes to shove, he's not going to be able to produce what he said he can. And if you go back in his history, he is at odds with everyone that he has come in contact with. And Kurt Wiebe is on Dave Janda's show pleading. This is like a bad infomercial. Pleading. Dennis Montgomery needs help. Dennis Montgomery treasure trove. Dennis Montgomery. You have no idea what Dennis Montgomery has, because he hasn't shown you anything. You called him a fraud 4 years ago because he hadn't shown you anything. He doesn't need help. What he needs to be, he does need to be heard on a witness stand under oath to answer questions. That's what he needs. And you're doing a disservice to the American public by promoting this guy when you have no factual basis, no information, no proof that he is legitimate. And as far as helping him, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office did everything in their power to help him. 2 free attorneys, an immunity agreement with the Arizona Attorney General's office, got him to a federal judge, and Larry Clayman got him to the FBI. How much more help do you need? So I think that Mary Fanning, Dave Janda, who does no research, it's pretty evident, need to stop pitching this guy around the globe like he's a stand-up United States citizen, because his history says he isn't, my interaction with him says he isn't, and going forward, he's not going to be.
Yeah. Well, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Very well stated, and I do want to thank you. I want to thank you for providing all this information, for your ongoing dedication to getting to the bottom of this and to the truth. It's it's resulted in a lot of barbs coming our way, including towards you, and you are a guy who has had his fair share of barbs coming towards him. So I really want to thank you for joining us today. Kevin, any final words before we wrap it up?
Well, we know, we all know that there's going to be an explosive response to this video. We know that the attacks on us are probably going to intensify. And that's part of standing by the evidence, and we do stand by our evidence. And what this does is this calls into question the credibility of each one of these people that are putting this story out there. And in my opinion, people should be held accountable for pushing a false story, not just on the American people, but could have possibly affected the legal case of General Flynn. And so I hope people share this program video with other people. I hope everybody stays in tune to the deep state coup that's going on against the president. And we just thank everybody for tuning in to this, and we thank you so much for your support.
Absolutely.
Jason, if I could really quick.
Yes, Mike,
really
absolutely.
Quick. If Mary Fanning, Alan Jones, Dave Janda want to talk about me, do it live stream, do it to my face, and be ready for the evidence that I can bring. Because what I have is evidence, but it doesn't support your guy. I have evidence. You don't have evidence. I have evidence. You want to smear me? Do it to my face. Don't be writing little articles or little tweets or whatever it is these people think they're accomplishing. Do it to my face. So there's the challenge. I'll live stream with you anywhere, on any platform, because I'm going to bring it. And trust me, you're not going to like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well said, Mike.
Absolutely. Very well said, Mike. And we'll look forward to that. It's definitely an open invitation, not for any kind of animosity, just to talk this out. And if those guys are for real and just confused, there should be no reason at all not to do that. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. If people are seeing the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp for the first time, Kevin, of course, is a recovering CIA officer. You can learn more about him by going to his website, fortheloveoffreedom.net. Kevin posts his daily ship brief there, and you can also support Kevin on Patreon or purchase his book, From the Company of Shadows. The website also contains concealed documents and the shadow code, which allow you to reveal the redacted portions of the book that were embarrassing to the CIA and have been illegally removed. Everybody who watches this show knows that Kevin hates illegal redactions. You can also see the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp every week on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Kevin has also recently started a Subscribestar channel, so you can go to subscribestar.com/Kevin-Shipp, and Shipp is spelled with 2 P's. You can also see the program on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I want to thank our guests today, Mike Zullo and Sharon Rondeau. Thanks for another great program, Kevin. I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Jason. We'll see you next week.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody, for watching. Have a great night.